Welcome back to Hinduism. In this video, we're going to look at the Dharmashastras, which are texts or scriptures on dharma or moral duty. The Dharmashastras come from the words shastras or treatises and dharma, which means duty or law. They count as a type of scripture known as smriti or remembered, which means they're regarded as having human authors rather than a divine author, although typically they're conceived as having been created under divine guidance or inspiration. The Dharmashastras date from the 2nd century BC and after. There are also some older texts known as Dharma Sutras from a slightly earlier period. The Dharmashastras are largely on the theme of what's called Varna, Ashrama, Dharma in Hinduism. This means duty or dharma based on a person's caste, varna, and their stage in life, ashrama. The term ashrama can mean a dwelling place, but in this context it means a period in someone's life. The basic idea is that not all humans have exactly the same duties. There are some duties or moral laws that do apply to everyone, such as telling the truth, not stealing, or not killing. However, there are other duties and rules in Hinduism that apply only to particular castes. A caste is a social class that a person is born into based on their family, and they can't change. The word varna literally means color, but in this context refers to a social caste. There are 4 main varnas: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Brahmins are the priests who interpret the Veda or revealed scriptures. Kshatriya are traditionally noble warriors who ruled the kingdoms and other territories and led the armies. Vaishya includes merchants and craftsmen. They're commoners, but they're basically free people. And the Shudra is a laborer or servant caste whose traditional occupation was serving the members of the other varnas. The 4 varnas go back to the Veda, the earliest Hindu scriptures. They're mentioned in the Rig Veda, for example, the earliest parts of which date back to 1500 BCE. However, the concept of varna appears to have evolved over the centuries, and the Dharmashastras present a much more rigid and codified view of the varnas and the rules applying to them than you find in the Veda. The most famous Dharmashastra is known as the Manusmriti, or the Laws of Manu. Manu was a famous sage or seer who survived an ancient cosmic flood. He's sometimes compared to the biblical figure of Noah. The Manusmriti was composed sometime between the 2nd century BCE and the 2nd century CE. So it was probably put together over a series of centuries by different authors and editors. There's no single version of the Manusmriti. There are multiple versions. One was not regarded as definitive or standard until modern times. The Manusmriti outlines rules and duties based on class, sex, and stage of life. So some examples are how to perform an Upanayana initiation ceremony for young men born into a Dvija Varna. Dvija or twice-born Varnas include Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya. These were the 3 Varnas that traditionally could fully take part in Vedic religion. Shudra Varna may have been added after because Shudras were not allowed to perform the Upanayana ceremony. This ceremony is a coming-of-age rite for young men, and it involves basically learning a few parts of the Veda and reciting some of the prayers or hymns. This qualifies a man to get married, have a family, and lead his family in certain simple Vedic rituals. Nowadays, the Upanayana is mainly only performed by male Brahmin families. Another example of rules from the Manusmriti is rules governing how members of Varnas should greet each other and how they should address each other. And there are many other details of daily life treated in that fashion. The Manusmriti should be regarded as a moral ideal. So it's never the case that Hindu society used to follow all of these laws across all the different kingdoms and territories of India. However, it's been regarded as normative or authoritative for many centuries. And so even though it's not practiced exactly, it still governs moral norms of how the Varnas see themselves and how they see their relative status and relations. One of the concepts you see in the Manusmriti and other Dharmashastras is the idea of ashramas or life stages. So the scheme you see pictured here is an ideal scheme that would mainly apply to male Brahmins, and it may never have been followed exactly in terms of those exact ages. The significance of it is it shows that you can pursue different goals and different social functions in different stages of your life. So ideally, a young Brahmin would be a student of the Veda from ages 1 to 24 approximately. Then, the next 24 years, they would live as a householder. A householder is someone who is married, can potentially have children, and have some kind of occupation where they earn money or other goods to support themselves and their family. And then the third stage is known as retiree. So this is when the person no longer is working or focusing primarily on providing for their family, but rather on taking up study of the Veda again and pursuing a more spiritual path. And then the final stage of renunciate or sannyasa is where they would leave home, renounce their family, and live as an ascetic in order to attain moksha or union with Brahman. And the idea here is that this can reconcile different strands of Vedic religion. Traditionally, the members of the Varnas, including Brahmins or priests, were expected to be householders as adults. So even priests in Hinduism, they performed Vedic rituals, but they would also be married and have children. However, later on, there was the ideal of the Upanishads and some later texts that introduced the idea of becoming a sannyasin or renunciate, renouncing the world, including your family, living very simply, spending your day meditating, perhaps living in the forest or another wilderness area, etc. This is incompatible with the life of a householder. But given the stages or ashramas, you could combine these two paths just at different stages of your life. It's worth talking about women in the Manusmriti. The basic social structure is highly patriarchal. This is not unique to Hinduism. It's common in most traditional religions and human societies. On the one hand, the Manusmriti says that the gods will only be pleased if women are honored. But on the other hand, there's also the teaching that a woman must remain under her father's, husband's, or son's control, depending on the stage of her life. Also, a woman must worship her husband as a god, even if he lacks good qualities, so even if he's not virtuous, for example. And a wife must never do anything to displease her husband. A husband is permitted to remarry after the death of their wife, but a woman is forbidden from remarrying after the death of their husband. So there's definitely a double standard there. A wife is regarded as a goddess of fortune and auspiciousness, or Srimati. However, women only seem to be honored insofar as they're performing as a wife and mother, those functions. Otherwise, they're not considered worthy of reverence. The picture is of a modern Hindu bride from Nepal. One thing to keep in mind is that the exact customs governing women, including dress and the way that wedding ceremonies happen, for example, do vary across different parts of India and South Asia. Another teaching you find in the Dharmashastras is Purusharthas, or personal goals. There are four main types of goals in Hindu belief: Kama, or pleasure; Artha, success; Dharma, duty; and Moksha, or liberation. Kama includes all types of physical pleasures. Sex is regarded as the most intense physical pleasure. That's why it's the topic of the Kama Sutra, or the discourse on Kama. But any other physical pleasure could also fit under this category. Artha means any type of physical or material goal apart from pleasure. So it includes things like wealth, power, success, fame, and high status. Dharma includes moral duty, so this is the focus of the Dharmashastras. Moksha is spiritual liberation. This is the focus of the Upanishads and some other Hindu texts. So there's also a notion of trivarga, which includes the three worldly or lower goals of pleasure, success, and duty, kama, artha, dharma. These goals are not regarded as equally valid or equally important. They're listed in order of increasing importance. Moksha is the highest, the transcendent goal. So there's an understanding in Hinduism that even though the Dharmashastras and their teachings are very important, they're actually ranked below the goal of moksha. So when you're pursuing the transcendent goal of moksha or liberation from the cycle of rebirth, you are not conceiving of yourself purely in terms of your identity as a certain varna or a certain sex or a certain age. You're looking at yourself mainly as your identity as a conscious being or pure awareness. And that's something that could conceivably be open to everyone, regardless of their caste or sex. There's also a fifth varna called Chandala Varna, or untouchable. The word untouchable is a reference to the concept that these are people born into families that are so impure they should not be touched. Another synonym for Chandala Varna is Panchala Varna, or fifth Varna. There are a variety of explanations for why the Chandala Varna may have originated. One apparent source of being regarded as impure or untouchable is engaging in an occupation that is regarded as impure or defiled in Hinduism. So Hinduism, like many other religions, does have a notion of spiritual purity. Certain types of actions can taint or pollute you. So example are handling the bodies of humans or animals, or handling things like trash. So if someone was a leather worker, for example, that involved handling the skins of a cow or other animal. Or if someone was a grave digger, or if someone was a garbage collector, those would have been regarded as impure occupations. And so families that did that would be regarded as untouchable. Now, traditionally in Indian society, one's occupation would be largely determined by the family one's born into. And that's why there could be an association between family or birth and occupation. Nowadays, Chandala Varna is often called Dalit. That's how members of this Varna typically refer to themselves. The word Dalit means broken or scattered. And it's basically a reference to the oppressed status of these individuals. There's also a legal term used in the Indian law called scheduled caste. This refers to castes that have positions in the bureaucracy or civil service and spots in the university system set aside for them because of their traditional oppression or lower status. The protections for Dalits were advocated by a famous Dalit politician named Ambedkar. He was one of the main authors of the Indian Constitution and one of the main figures in the Indian independence movement in the 20th century. You can see the Dalits on the right pictured with the portrait of Ambedkar, who they regard as an important leader and teacher. However, many of the legal protections for Dalits that were enshrined in the Indian Constitution and Indian law have been watered down in recent decades, in large part because of the activity of a party known as the BJP. They are a Hindu party. They are often called Hindu nationalists. They believe that Hinduness or Hindutva should be part of the Indian national identity. They also tend to have an attitude of reinforcing the traditional Varna or caste system. And so they've not gotten rid of the concept of scheduled castes that still exist in Indian law, but they've added many other castes as being also eligible for spots in the civil service and also at universities. So they've basically watered down or diluted the original intention of the laws protecting Dalits. And there still is a great deal of discrimination against Dalits, especially both in India and in the Hindu diaspora, for example, in North America or other parts of the world. Finally, it's very important to introduce the concept of jati and explain, at least briefly, how it relates to varna. Jati can also be translated as caste, but it's basically a more particular concept than varna. Varna covers broad swaths of Hindu society. There's 4 varnas. Jatis exist in the hundreds, if not more. So a jati is a particular caste or clan, you could think of it as, into which a person is born. The jatis are even more closely associated with particular occupations. The relation between jati and varna is that most of the jatis are associated with a varna. So for example, the Patel jati is, I believe, regarded as a Vaishya varna. And so you could look at the 4 varnas as collections of jatis. Now, the jatis are important because Hindus traditionally only marry within the same jati, not only within the same varna. And jatis are often found only in particular regions, such as the Patel jati is especially found in the state of Gujarat. And the jati system is the theme of a somewhat recent documentary named Meet the Patels that came out in 2014. And the family of the Patels, that's the focus of the documentary, they live in the United States, but the parents want their son, who's also the filmmaker, to marry someone within the same Patel jati. And so it talks about how Indians will go about doing this in the diaspora and just the various customs surrounding jatis, especially regarding marriage.